I'm really proud to have been with the production of Madama Butterfly for almost 20 years. In 2025-26 season, it'll be the 20th anniversary of this opera here at the Met. So I'm very deeply connected with it. And today I want to take you once again to some of the puppetry sources that have provided for this really, really exceptional, long-lived adaptation of Puccini's work. We're going to look a little bit deeply at the Bunraku tradition, and which many of you got to experience, the three-person form puppeteering, but we're going to go a little bit more into the fabrication and craft of that whole style. And finally, we'll just talk about how the traditional puppet theater in Japan has influenced the use of puppetry in this show and in other shows throughout the repertoire in Western companies. So to begin with, just imagine that you yourself are almost 100 years ago and are in a big port city, much like New York, and are out for a night on the town. But this port city is not New York, it's Osaka, Japan. This is a clip from the 1936 film Osaka Elegy, which features a bit of Bunraku puppetry in it in the context of an audience watching the performance. So I just want to open this up and let you see this is what the Bunraku theater might appear like to an audience over 100 years ago. Here we go. And we can pause the video right here. So that video from a love suicide play of the Bunraku Theater is just an example of what the theater style looks like in traditional performance. And this is a very, very interesting film, this film Osaka Elegy, because it's a film that also showcases this kind of love triangle that appears in that Bunraku play, but also talks about very specific gender issues within Japanese society in the 1930s. So if you ever have a chance to watch it, check it out. As we move forward with the next slide, this is happening, this piece is happening, and the center of Bunraku Theater is in Osaka. And Osaka is a port city in the inner sea of Japan. And it's always been a place where rival companies and performances have been competing with each other. And so 300 years ago, different puppet companies competed and kind of in a little turf battles to get audience to give out a rise to this three-person style, which we now know as Bunraku. Next slide, please. As many of you in the workshop saw and experienced, the primary mechanism of the puppetry is a three-person system in which a puppeteer operates the head and right arm, another puppeteer operates the left arm, and sometimes other props and set pieces, and then a third puppeteer, usually the most junior member of the entire group, operates the feet. And it is an incredibly difficult and intricate way of performing that gives a really, really beautiful and evocative and sensitive movement to these figures. You can see in this picture, the master puppeteer is a man named Yoshida Minosuke. And if we can go to the next slide, please. He started his career as a very, very young puppeteer, backstage, assisting, watching, viewing, and experiencing this repertoire of work. He's still alive today and has become a national living treasure, a puppeteer who has one of the most exalted titles that you can have in Japan. But I guess that's the important thing to mention here about Japanese puppet theater and about the Bunraku. It's a generational type of commitment. It's not just something like you do a show and then leave. Once you're in it for life. If you're really, really focused and devoted. And that's a kind of form of puppetry which we don't really have in the West in the same type of way. Next slide, please. Here I got to meet Master Minosuke many, many years ago when I had much less facial hair. And here he is inside his dressing room prior to a performance, greeting me. And this little room where he prepares is where many of the different elements of the actual puppet come together for the first time. So let's look at all these elements of the puppets, of the Bunraku puppet, and see how they come together inside a master's hand in expression of puppetry. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry. First, I should mention that we often see the puppetry in Bunraku first. That's the first thing that pops out to our minds. But just as in opera, the other two very, very important elements of Bunraku are music and text. And here we see the two other major parts of the Bunraku theater. That is the girayu, or storyteller, who's there, the gentleman there with the kind of tasseled script in front of him, and then the musician, the shamisen player. And these two incredible artists combine with the puppeteers, create the entire operatic experience that is the Bunraku theater. And the similarities are quite great because many of the best and most well-known of Bunraku plays are tragedies. They don't end well. And these plays are still performed to this day, almost 300 years after they were first written. Let's skip back now to the parts of the puppet. The Bunraku puppets are modular. That means they're made from very, very separate pieces which come together for a particular show, depending on the character, the text, and many different variables about their hair and costuming. But this is what the puppet structure looks like underneath all of that. You can see the legs, the kind of body, the arms with their controls, and of course the head. And to the left of this puppet diagram, you can also see these raised platform shoes, which the head puppeteer is standing on as he walks through the stage carrying the puppet. So not only do you have to be a great puppeteer, but you also have to be comfortable walking like 6 inches above the stage floor. And this allows that so that the foot puppeteer can actually reach the feet and be able to manipulate them without being in total pain. They're only in partial pain. Anyway, we can go to the next slide. This is the main part of the body. It's basically a bamboo hoop attached to a shoulder piece with fabric. And this is kind of the central like Lego block that all the pieces come together in to form the puppet. In the next slide, if we can go forward, you can see an undressed puppet with its head, arms, and feet all attached, standing on a stand. And this is like part of the puppet that we never ever get to see really, because all of this is hidden behind the unique costuming and of course behind the skill that the performers bring to it. In the next slide, we can see examples of many, many different hands. And you can notice that these hands sometimes just have a single movement. They just move like this. But in the next slide, you can also see that they have a little hoop inside the wrist where the puppeteer can slide their finger in and grab a prop, a scroll, a brush, a piece of paper, a sword. And if you go to the next slide even, we can see an example of female hands, which are very, very delicately jointed so they can actually bend forward and back to express more dance-like and subtle movements. Moving to the other body parts, we now come to the feet. And the feet basically are wooden on the bottom, but have a kind of paper mache thigh so that they can kind of help reduce the weight. And they're operated, of course, from below. And you can see the little black handle by which the puppeteer holds on to those controls as they manipulate the puppet through the space. In our next image, we look at the kind of central kind of part of the puppet, and that's the puppet head. Every puppet head begins from a solid piece of block, which is sculpted to specific dimensions and is made out of Japanese cypress wood, the same wood that is used to make temples in Japan. It's a very hard, long living and rot-resistant wood. So many of the puppets, or some of the oldest puppets in Japan, have heads that can be 200, even 250 years old. The next slide shows one of the original, or one of the most important 20th century craftsmen of these heads, a man named Oe Minosuke. And he was very important in the Bunraku theater after World War II for rebuilding the stock of puppet heads, many of which were destroyed during the war since large cities were bombed and there were a lot of fires, a lot of cultural places were destroyed. So Oe Minosuke was a carver who kind of set out on a mission post-war to kind of reconstruct heads that had been lost and also to restore those ones which had been saved. In the next slide, you see his disciple, a man named Mr. Tanoshi Murao. And Mr. Murao actually works right now at the Bunraku National Theater. He learned these techniques from his master and continues the practice of preparing, repairing, and sculpting new heads for the theater. And behind him, you can see that massive, awesome display of different characters for some of their upcoming performances. In the next slide, you'll see Murao-san applying a paint layer to the finished wood sculpture. And this layer of paint is made from very, very traditional materials. It's actually a mix of glue made from fish bones and crushed up seashell paste. And it creates a very, very strong but humid, susceptible to humid kind of gesso that covers the face. So it often has to be repainted after a series of years after use and wear. In the next photo, we can see examples of two different heads. The one on the right is a female head from about 170 years ago. and the one on the left was sculpted in the 1970s. So you can see that these objects, these puppet objects, are objects that in a way surpass the lifetime of any living puppeteer. And if these heads could tell stories of what they've seen and of the different performances that they've been, I imagine that would be pretty interesting considering they have such a history of being handled by different performers. In the next image, we see a drawing of the special effects or the kind of mechanisms inside the head that allow sometimes the eyeballs to move, the eyebrows to move, and the mouths to move. And in the next photo, you can see how that diagram is expressed with you can see the actual wooden example in the next slide. There it is. And so you can see how intricate these objects are in their interior. And you'll also see this kind of black bar that's hanging at the back of the head, which all the strings seem to be tied to. That is the spring mechanism that allows many of these objects to open and close or to do their magic. And those springs are created from whale baleen. And if you go to the next slide, this is whale baleen. It's the part of the whale which sucks in krill, deep in the ocean to be able to kind of feed the animal. And that part of the whale anatomy was also used in the 19th century to make corsets, since it could be very springy and also control the size and kind of tightness of a garment. Yes, boning. Thank you, Deanne. In our next picture, we see some more of these incredible artisans who work on these puppets. The next image shows the puppet craftsmen who are responsible for the wig making. So just like at the Metropolitan Opera, all of these puppets have their hair done. The hair is made from real hair that is bought or procured. It's also made sometimes from brushed silk and from yak hair. And the hair is very, very important in defining what the age and social position of a particular character might be. So the artisans who do this aren't just hairdressers. They actually have a lot of knowledge about particular hairstyles and whether that belongs to a married person or a single person or somebody who has a lot of money or no money. Let's go to the next slide. These hair pieces, especially in male characters, are attached to those wooden heads by this hammered brass kind of skull cap. That is kind of like the thing that holds the hair onto the head, particularly if it's a samurai with a huge hair piece. And those intricately made pieces, once again, it's like each one of these objects requires a very, very particular artisan to make these things. In the next picture, you'll see Akiko Takahashi, who is one of the wig makers at the Bunraku National Theater, styling some hair for a samurai puppet. And actually, fun note is to the right of her is a puppet that I designed and had built here in New York, and Akiko agreed so kindly to create the hair for that puppet in Japan. And so the puppet next to her is an example of an international puppetry collaboration through hair. In our next slide, we can once again see the wall of puppets, which is behind the workshop at the Bunraku National Theater. These puppets are all almost ready to be delivered to the master for an upcoming production. And they all have like little tags on them. And the tags say the name of the puppeteer who's going to be operating them, and also the name of the character and show that they appear in. In the next slide, the last thing that comes together to make these pieces is the costumes. And the costumes are also, they're not just buying fabric at Joann's. They actually have very, very particular, nothing against Joann's. I love good Joann's, but they actually have very particular artisans in Kyoto who are producing fabrics that have a pattern which is the same scale as the puppets. So if we would see a pattern which looks, terrific on a human kimono, they are making that pattern but miniaturizing it so it fits these 3 to 4 foot tall puppets and using that particular fabric to make these costumes. In the next image, we can now see the costumes uh, uh, folded up. There you go. We can now see these next image, these costumes folded up into a little package. And so now all of those things that we have seen, the body parts, the head, the little costume packet, all of that is delivered to the master puppeteer, and the master puppeteer then does the final step, and that is sewing together the entire package to put together the puppet. In our next picture, you'll see my teacher in Japanese puppetry, Master Koryu Nishikawa V. And you can see him in his kind of performing garb. And to his right, you'll see an example of a fully dressed and assembled puppet. And that puppet has been sewed together by Koryu-san, and it's just the way that he likes it. So now let's move actually 2 slides forward. And now we come to the puppetry in Madama Butterfly. You've probably already seen, because you saw the little clip, that one thing which is very, very different in style from the traditional style to what happens inside this production is that the puppet is operating in a world of human beings. So the puppet is a human-sized child, and he's being manipulated and interacting on the ground with the opera singers and the rest of the cast. This is in very, very distinct difference from the traditional style in which it's all puppets all the time, and the puppets are actually performing in the air. So if you see the next slide, you'll see one of the most complicated parts about using Bunraku-style puppetry for Madama Butterfly is that this young boy, Trouble, needs to walk on the floor, not in the air. And so our foot puppeteer, the incredible Kevin Augustine, is doing a Herculean job of manipulating that puppet along the ground, walking, following, staying near and performing with our soprano. And I would say that this is also the other kind of really, really important reason why Anthony Minghella chose to have a puppet portray the young boy in this piece. It wasn't only to quote unquote do something cool or or provide something like that was like a special attraction. Anthony Minghella, the original director, was actually very familiar with the power of puppetry to captivate an audience. And he felt that a young boy operated in this style could really become one of the best acting partners possible for the soprano. Often, this role is played by a child actor. They have to be late at night. Their mother is singing to them in Italian at the top of their voices. It's uncomfortable. It can be very, very hard for a child to pull that off. But this puppet is almost a perfect actor. He is really responsive. He's totally there as an open page and an open book for the soprano. And it's very, very interesting, having worked in this piece for so long, to see how much the puppet really allows the audience to feel this story in a very, very real way. We know that this is an opera, that people are singing in a different language, that it's totally over the top. But there's something about the use of Bunraku-style puppetry in this piece which allows an emotional opening for the audience, allows them to care about this puppet, primarily because they are expressing and placing their emotions on that boy. The last Oh, sorry, I'm getting a couple of questions in the chat, and if we have a second, I will try to answer them in just a moment. But I just wanted to show one last slide before my last clip, and that is another example of Bunraku-style puppetry in a Western context. And this is from another Western puppeteer, and in this case, we're seeing the puppet actually puppeteered on top of a surface rather than directly on the floor. So this is another way in which we see that style. Just to close us off today, I want to replay for you the beautiful little short documentary that shows the three of us puppeteers working the puppet in Madama Butterfly. So let's see that clip.
Well, there's one puppet and there's three of us. And the one puppet, he's got one little 3-year-old brain, and we've got to all come together and unify.
Oh, yeah? Oh, wait, from Gloria?
Yeah.
You know, we're trying to embody the character and breadth of one child. How do you do that? And as Kevin said, one of the main things that we do together to get that is to breathe together.
We each animate a different part of him, and I'm on his feet. And the way not to do it is, okay, Tom, what are we doing? Move left, two steps.
Obviously, yeah, we can't do each other with language. We're connected through tension within the puppet itself. So I'm holding the back, and I'm always maintaining a little bit of a pull between my hand and Kevin's hands on the feet.
Obviously, this is super physical, the kind of thing that we have to do. Just in order for the puppet to look good, you have to be in really intense positions, so just keeping the body strong and flexible.
It's just like a musician in the pit warming up their instrument. It's really important for us to feel, to check in with each other and re-engage.
This is Cho-Cho-san for Act 3. She opens Act 3. All of this is her silk that needs to be packed in her pouch. But the dancer, she's got the technique to do that. So we wait until just before we go on. She is puppeteered by 2 people, myself and a dancer, and then sometimes a third dancer at certain moments. So I come back to her, top of Act 3. All right, gotta go. See you later.
Zito's Puppeteers, Subcenter from Brighton. Percussion stage left.
This style of puppetry is adapted from the Japanese Bunraku tradition. And that's a traditional puppetry form. It's over 300 years old. But it's really that kind of origin and that aesthetic from the Japanese tradition. The way you see black-clothed performers manipulating the set, actually puppeteering the set. You know, the way that we are not hidden, we're exposed, and if you see our faces under the veils, you can actually even see our own emotions as we try and breathe and live with the boy.
If you see a picture of it, you might not think it will feel like a living child or something, but then you start to see the sopranos interact with it, and it really does evoke that. I picked it up for the first time when some of the covers were on the puppet a few weeks ago, and I was just like struck by this paternal instinct, something, because the little body and the legs wrap around you, and it's suddenly like, oh wow, that is what it's like to hold a child.
That's what the thing about puppetry is. You imbue this kind of object with life. One thing that was so interesting about being involved from this production from the start was that Anthony Minghella, who directed the original, he never talked about the puppet. He always called the character the boy. And what we're trying to give, I think, in the best sense of the word, is the best possible boy for our soprano.
Hey everyone, this has been super, super fun. I'm so sorry I don't have any more time to answer all of your amazing questions, but I just want to thank Ray and the whole Met team for having me. Please come see this show and please reach out if you want any more resources, either through the Met Education site or you can look up my own website as well. Thank you, everybody. Have a great time and look forward to seeing you at the opera.